Atlantis isn't lost, it's misremembered. You've been taught it was fantasy, a drowned fairy tale for dreamers. But the deeper record says otherwise. Atlantis was a blueprint, a civilization where spiritual science tuned matter with mind, where sound, light, geometry, and crystal intelligence made the world coherent. It rose when wisdom governed power. It fell when power outran wisdom. The ruins aren't just under the sea, they're inside us, scattered as impulses, symbols, and dreams. This film isn't a treasure hunt for stones, it's a recovery of frequency. We will follow the line from Plato's transmission to global echoes, from sacred technology to its misuse, from engineered amnesia to the quiet memory waking in people like you. By the end, you won't be asking, "Did Atlantis exist?" You'll be asking you, "How do I live as Atlantis now?" You don't have to believe in a sunken city to feel the weight of what Plato was trying to pass on. He didn't whisper, he documented. In Timaeus and Critias, he frames an inheritance that came to Athens through Solon's visit to the Egyptian priests of Sais, a memory of a maritime power beyond the pillars of Heracles. Wealthy, orderly, confident, then morally unmoored. The account isn't painted with fairy glitter, but with civic detail. Concentric rings of land and sea, canals and causeways, a central temple, 10 kings bound by law. It reads like minutes from an ancient planning meeting, not a campfire story. And then he adds the charge that matters. The collapse wasn't random. It followed a fracture in character, power slipping its leash, appetite taking the throne. When you strip away the ridicule that clings to the word Atlantis, you find a pattern Plato returns to across his work. A society flourishes when inner order matches outer power and fails when power outruns wisdom. That's the heartbeat beneath the tale. Even if you file it under allegory, it's an allegory with teeth. He places the Atlantoi not in a vague nowhere, but beyond the straits, facing the Atlantic, trading, engineering, projecting influence across the sea. The point isn't to prove a map. It's to remember a method, form as conductor, law as tuning fork, ritual as governance, geometry as the spine of a living city. Some Atlantean work is too candid for this platform. Join our free newsletter at the link in the description to get what we can't publish here. Enter your email now and for a limited time receive a free ebook copy of our book, not a reward, simply so you're equipped. Listen to how the story is transmitted. Solon hears it from priests who claim records older than Athens itself. Critias recounts it as a family memory. Plato stages it as a philosophical drama, then leaves Critias fragmentary, as if to make the listener complete the lesson inside. The omissions are part of the teaching. You're meant to ask, what happens when brilliance loses its anchor? You're meant to notice how often our own age worships cleverness while starving conscience. Plato's details are oddly tactile. He speaks of orichalcum gleaming in the sun, of a sacred precinct walled in alternating bands of metal, of horse-breeding grounds and naval drills, of a fertile plain cut by a rectilinear grid of irrigation. He describes kings who swear to laws before sacrificing a bull over a pillar inscribed with oaths, ritual binding power to principle. Whether you read this as shrouded reportage or as encoded philosophy, the mechanism is the same. Coherence. Law binds force. Ritual binds appetite. Geometry binds space. The built world isn't neutral, it shapes the mind that moves through it. You know this already. There are rooms that make you small and rooms that make you honest. It's right to steelman the caution. Scholars remind us that Plato loved to teach by story, that he had political aims, that the dialogue is unfinished. Keep the caution. But notice that his supposed myth is overloaded with engineering. Harbors cut to measure, a main canal to the sea, rings dimensioned to exact ratios, a city planned like a tone you could stand inside. He is telling you that form carries mind. He is telling you that architecture can lift consciousness or flatten it. You've felt both, the square that drains you, the temple that straightens your spine without a word. The moral through line is blunt. Atlantis thrives while humility leads. The moment the divine portion in its rulers thins, Plato's phrase, display, replaces duty. Wealth, unyoked from stewardship, tilts into spectacle. Technologies tuned for service are redirected toward domination. In response, the cosmos answers with correction. The text breaks just as Zeus convenes the gods, but the verdict is already delivered. Imbalance cannot stand indefinitely. Whether that correction arrived as flood, fire, invasion, or a long unwinding of fortune is not the point. The point is the law beneath events. Misuse invites entropy. So why start here with a philosopher and a broken dialogue? Because Plato sits at the hinge between memory and modernity. He's the acceptable face of a forbidden subject. Quote an oracle and you'll be dismissed. Quote Plato and people listen. Use that door. Walk through it with your own attention alive. Don't outsource your knowing to the loudest certainty. Feel what lands in your body when you hear of temples as frequency chambers, of geometry as conductor, of crystals not as ornaments but as order keepers. If it registers as déjà vu, that's not proof. It's permission to inquire. Here's the practical lens to carry forward. Treat Atlantis as a method before you treat it as a map. The method says align inner state and outer structure. Pair capacity with conscience. Let beauty do real work. Under that lens, the ruins we chase underwater become mirrors above water. Our classrooms, our offices, our cities, our screens, are they tuned to lift or tuned to harvest? Our tools, do they amplify presence or addiction? Our leaders, do they swear oaths to the whole or to appetite? These are Atlantean questions because they measure coherence, not hype. Plato's transmission isn't asking you to argue in comment sections about coordinates. It's asking you to recover discernment. It's asking you to notice when a space, a sound, a schedule, a story either clarifies you or clutters you. It's asking you to remember that civilization is not primarily roads and ports, but agreements about what we serve. Take that memory into the next chapter because the Greeks were not alone in keeping it. Across oceans and ages, other tongues preserved the echo of a sea-taken world. When patterns repeat in distant places, it isn't always fiction getting loud. Sometimes it's truth refusing to die. If one civilization fell, its echo wouldn't stay locked inside a single library. It would scatter into songs, rites, star stories, and cautionary tales that drift wherever survivors land. Step outside the Greek doorway and you start hearing that echo in other tongues. In the Mexica memory, there is Aztlan, an ancestral place across water that is less a set of coordinates and more a promise carried in the mouth. Across the great ocean, Pacific lineages speak of Mu or Lemuria, not as a tourist map, but as a warning that the ocean remembers. In South Asia, Tamil lore keeps Kumari Kandam, a drowned homeland tied to scholars and sages. In Egypt, priests spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when order and knowledge were set. In India, the tale of Manu rides out a deluge. In Greece, Deucalion does the same. In Sumer, Utnapishtim builds the boat. Along Australia's coasts, elders still sing the sea's slow rise. These are not one story photocopied. They are one rhythm retuned to local instruments. If you're allergic to forced certainty, keep that allergy. It will protect you from nonsense. But let that caution live beside another fact. Human cultures save their deepest instructions inside story because stone can be burned and libraries can be looted. A flood epic is not only a morality play, it is a field manual disguised as poetry. How to read the sky, where to keep the seeds, why the calendar must bind to the heavens. When a way of living collapses, the lesson travels as a parable that children can learn and tyrants cannot easily confiscate. Notice the motifs that recur precisely where oceans rule the horizon, a priestly class that is scientific as much as spiritual. Keepers of calendars, ratios, and harmonics appears again and again. Sacred cities are laid out as instruments. Axes line to solstice and equinox. Courtyards convert shadow into time. Towers ring the landscape like tuning forks. Catastrophe is framed as moral before it is physical. People lose the inner law. The outer law unravels and the sea finishes the work. Then comes the seeding. Survivors cross water, rename the same principles and fold. them into fresh languages so they can land in new ears. You don't have to accept every claim to feel the rhyme in your bones. Sit with a Pacific navigator and learn to steer by swell, bird, cloud, and star, and you'll meet a literacy that never needed a screen. Stand in a megalithic circle and you'll realize stone can keep a sky clock with no battery. Place your palm on a lotus carved into a lintel and your nervous system calms before you can explain why. These are instructions embedded in material, a pedagogy of matter that turns space into teacher. They are consistent with a civilization that thought in frequencies first and floors and roofs second. Memories also scatter because empires do what empires do. Standardize, tax, and ridicule whatever resists the ledger. When conquerors set languages on fire, the survivors move wisdom into harmless containers. A children's tale whose numbers add to a canon of proportion. A festival whose colors rehearse a spectrum code. A folk song whose 5 notes restore a frayed mood. You inherit this patchwork without the manual and wonder why certain shapes feel like home. Why the seed of life keeps appearing on pottery, quilts, and logos. Why a chant you do not understand still steadies your breath. The academic mind is right to ask for dates, strata, ceramics, and signatures. Ask for them, but don't let museum labels become your only authority. The archive is bigger than vitrines. It lives in the way old towns bend to the river because wind curls there. In the way ridge lines carry shrines so the hill can sing to the valley. In the way an elder measures by knuckle and sun and still lands on a module your architect would recognize. A lost atlas can survive as habit. A syllabus can live in a proportion canon, a chant, a color law. So what do you do with a chorus that resists one neat date and one neat map? You listen for the carrier wave that runs through all of it. Water, teaching, fall, seeding, oath. You weigh each tradition with humility. Then you test the invitation in the only lab you fully own, your awareness. If a story inflates you or numbs you, set it aside. If a story steadies you, clarifies you, and calls you to service, keep it. The Atlantean signal does not make you special, it makes you responsible. It asks what you will do with the tools you remember. Imagine this not as detectives pinning red string across a wall, but as gardeners walking fields to see where the same plant rises uninvited. If the flower keeps returning, sacred geometry here, flood warnings there, crystal lore elsewhere, you don't argue the plant into non-existence. You study the soil that favors it. The soil is the human nervous system, the sea, the sky, and the unkillable urge to make meaning. That is why the echo survives the arson of libraries, why a child with no teacher still doodles spirals and stars, why a self-taught mason still lands on ratios a scholar would recognize. Plato opened one door. These are the others. Walk through without making an idol of any single threshold. Let Aztlan and Kumari Kandam, Lemuria and Zep-Tepi do their quiet work. Not to convince you of coordinates, but to resensitize you to coherence. Because once you hear the global rhyme, the hunt for relics gives way to instruments. The next chapter isn't about arguing maps. It's about remembering how temples became frequency chambers, how stone was tuned, how light braided with breath. You are not chasing ghosts across oceans. You are gathering a language your body already speaks. If Atlantis felt like home when you read of rings, temples, and gleaming metals, it's because their technology wasn't chords and screens, it was alignment. The Atlantean instinct is simple and radical. Organize matter so that mind remembers itself. Not extraction, coherence. Build spaces that tune the body the way a well-tuned instrument holds a note without strain. Even if you set aside every legend and take this only as design philosophy, the method still works. Sound shapes matter, light trains attention, geometry carries intention, crystal holds a steady pulse. A city becomes an instrument, a person becomes a player, and between them resonance does the quiet work that laws and slogans cannot. Start with sound. Strike a bowl and water laces into patterns. That's cymatics doing what your bones already know. Vibration organizes. Humming a single vowel for 3 minutes isn't mysticism, it's entrainment. A scattered system agreeing on one pulse. Choirs feel it as lift in the chest. Meditators hear a room lock in. Ancient builders took that seriously. Chambers were curved to cradle a tone, niches placed where harmonics collect. Stairways doubled as resonators, flagstones that sing underfoot told you where to stand. Whisper galleries and domes that carry a note are not accidents. They are reminders that space can collaborate with voice. Whether you call that engineering or symbolism, the effect is the same. The nervous system steadies, the breath lengthens, and attention comes home. Then light. You don't need a lab to measure what your skin already tells you. Morning light steadies, midday glare scatters, dusk softens. Sanctuaries were choreographed for that dance. Apertures admit a blade of solstice sun to kiss a single altar. Colonnades turn harsh noon into milk. Polished stone and colored glass filter spectrum into medicine for focus and rest. Call it symbolism if you like. The result still lands in the body. Move from a windowless box to a room washed in indirect daylight and watch your shoulders drop. Hold a candle at night and feel thoughts slow to the pace of flame. Light is tempo. The old builders tuned it. Geometry is where philosophy becomes physics for the eye. Ratios are relationships your nervous system can feel. A spiral that grows by a modest constant reads as generous. Rectangles set to simple harmonies feel stable. The seed of life pattern is the alphabet of spacing and belonging. Lay out a room on awkward proportions and people talk fast to fill the discomfort. Lay it out on a clear module and conversation breathes. Builders across cultures discovered that certain spans, vaults, and arcs gather energy the way a cove gathers tide. Align a corridor to sunrise and the day enters you as you enter the day. Place a stone so it frames a star and time itself becomes architecture. Crystals complete the set, not as trinkets to hoard, but as order keepers. Quartz is ordinary and astonishing. Squeeze it and it produces a tiny voltage. Tickle it with current and it hums at a precise rate. That's why watches and radios trust it, stability you can build on. Translate that into temple craft and you get a simple intuition. Couple stable oscillators with tuned spaces and the whole environment prefers coherence. A cluster of quartz in a resonant niche is not a promise of miracles. It's a nudge towards steadiness. If you've ever felt calmer with a smooth stone in your palm, you already know how matter can cue the mind. The pattern across these four, sound, light, geometry, crystal, isn't that they prove a myth. It's that they explain why certain places feel like home and certain practices work across cultures. Humming, a candle, a bell, a courtyard that frames the sky at a rightness your body recognizes before your intellect catches up. None of this demands an ideology. It asks for attention. Do you want the room you live in to pull your breath shallow or to lengthen it without effort? Do you want your tools to sharpen presence or scatter it? Steelmanning the skeptic keeps us honest. Yes, acoustic sweet spots can be charted. Yes, color associations vary by culture and context. Good, bring the charts and keep the humility. What matters is repeatable effect. If a 7-minute hum changes your state every time, you've learned something practical about your instrument. If arranging your desk by a simple module makes work serene, you've glimpsed how geometry governs mood. The words you use for the mechanism can differ. The body's answer remains the same. There's also an ethics implied here. Frequency tools magnify intention. A room that quiets the mind can heal. It can also persuade. A ritual that opens the heart can invite service. It can also disarm judgment in the wrong hands. Aligning matter to mind without aligning mind to truth is how rises become falls. The original blueprint tied tech to vow, capacity bound to conscience, initiation before access, elders checking appetite before approving power. Keep that in view because the moment a culture confuses spectacle for sanctity, the same tools that lift us become levers. You don't need a stone temple to begin. Your body is already a chamber. Breath is tuning. Voice is instrument. Morning light is teacher. A clear ratio on your desk is a start. Place one piece of quartz where you sit, not as superstition but as a reminder that everything vibrates and that your attention is the master frequency in any room. Let the proof be the peace you keep and the clarity you carry into action. In the next part, we'll ask what held all this together when Atlantis was upright, not the stones or the tricks, but the ethics that governed the hands that built them. If Atlantis was an instrument, ethics was its tuning key. Power didn't float free, it was yoked to vows, to elders, to rhythms that reminded bright minds what they served. The civilization's genius wasn't only stone and spectrum, it was a culture that made maturity a prerequisite for leverage. Initiation wasn't theater, it was a filter that kept capacity from outrunning character. You advanced when your life made the oath believable. When the way you carried water, handled conflict, and kept your word under pressure showed that your hands could hold power without clutching. The operating system was simple to say and hard to live. Power with, not power over. In later language, some would call it the law of one, the recognition that consciousness is shared, that what you do to the field, you do to yourself. In practice, this wasn't a slogan on a temple wall, it was embedded in process. Councils required dissent to be voiced and properly heard. Leaders swore service before spectacle, and every office came with a ritual reminder of impermanence. You are a caretaker, not a king. Decisions were timed with breath and sky. Deliberation slowed until clarity arrived. The calendar enforced humility, not haste. Merit looked different in this frame. Skill without humility was unfinished. Vision without community was suspect. A true adept could be trusted with resonance because they had first been trusted with repair. The unglamorous work of making amends, of tending the vulnerable, of sitting with someone's grief without trying to fix it for your own comfort. Apprenticeship was not a fast-tracked download of tricks. It was years of patterning the nervous system to stay honest when praise swelled and when criticism burned. Rites existed to stress test the vow, silence to test patience, service to test pride, solitude to test appetite. When the inner weather steadied, the gates opened wider. You can see the mechanisms that maintained this order. Sacred architecture doubled as accountability. Oaths were not whispered in side rooms but spoken in resonant halls where the voice made ripples the whole body could feel. Law wasn't a book alone, it was a calendar of renewal. At set intervals, officials returned to the precinct to be measured not by popularity but by coherence. Did their presence settle a room? Did their decisions align with the whole's well-being, not merely with a faction's appetite? If a leader's breath shortened and their tone sharpened whenever power was threatened, the hall told on them. The space itself made misalignment obvious. This isn't nostalgia for a spotless past, it's a description of incentives that any age can adopt. Make access to amplifying tools contingent on demonstrated steadiness. Tie prestige to service, not spectacle. Encode humility into office. Design spaces that slow the breath before the vote. Reward truth-telling over brand defense. None of that requires mythic ancestry. It requires the courage to choose architecture of rooms, of roles, of rituals that favors wisdom under pressure. Steel manning the skeptic keeps us clean. Did Atlanteans uniformly live this way? Unlikely. No culture keeps its vows perfectly, and every temple has its politics. But if you read the rise as a long season of coherence, you can infer the habits that made it possible. Initiation as responsibility, beauty as discipline, elders as ballast, and a shared understanding that technology magnifies whatever sits in the driver's seat. Put a greedy heart in a frequency chamber and you won't get enlightenment. You'll get amplification of greed. Put a patient, service-trained heart in the same chamber and you get clarity multiplied. What matters is the leverage this ethic gives an individual life right now. You don't need a council of 10 kings to practice power with. Begin where Atlantis began, with the smallest unit of governance, your attention. Before you pick up a tool that amplifies you, ask an Atlantean question. Am I tuned to the whole or to my hunger? Slow any decision that tightens your chest. Breathe until your posture says caretaker rather than conqueror. Make your room an oath. Remove what scatters, keep what steadies, place one object that reminds you who you serve. Let your calendar carry rhythm, work and rest, input and silence, so your life stops sprinting against itself. Divine order wasn't a theology. It was a daily practice that made civilizational scale possible. Enough people living power with becomes law without coercion. Enough leaders bound by vow becomes stability without stagnation. You can feel, even as we say this, how thin such vows are in our age. Influence decoupled from responsibility, reach from repair, invention from wisdom. That is why the Atlantean story isn't a soft-focus legend but a mirror. It shows the conditions under which a culture lifts and the warning signs of slide. So the safeguards mattered. Roles rotated. Teachers were cross-checked by peers outside their lineage. Young prodigies were paired with elders whose first job was to keep the prodigy human. Public rites reminded everyone that brilliance is a loan, not a crown. Even commerce honored rhythm. Feast followed fast, taking followed giving, harvest followed fallow. The economy breathed on purpose so the people would remember how to. When the breath of a culture is paced, panic finds fewer purchase points. And here's the quiet genius: beauty enforced truth. When a leader entered a well-proportioned hall and felt their own breath lengthen, they were less likely to sell the room a lie. When a council timed its decisions with the sky, they were less likely to forget their place inside a larger order. The architecture made arrogance uncomfortable. The rituals made forgetting harder. The calendar made drift visible. Ethics wasn't a sermon, it was a surround. And when the cracks widen, the music changes. Momentum replaces rhythm. Initiation is skipped in favor of speed. Elders are sidelined as obstacles to innovation. The same frequency tools that once calmed a populace are repurposed to charm them. Titles harden. Spectacle crowds out service. The breath shortens before every decision, and no one notices because the numbers still look good. That is the drift from divine order to display, from stewardship to show. In the next chapter, we step over that threshold and watch the fall take shape. Momentum replaced rhythm. Initiation was skipped. Elders were rebranded as friction. The tuning key of ethics slipped from the hand that turned it, and power began to play itself louder just to prove it could. The calendar that once slowed decisions became a scoreboard. Speed won the argument because speed could be graphed. In that atmosphere, the breath shortened before every choice, and no one noticed because the numbers were still rising. Structures followed incentives. Councils that once required dissent to be heard learned to stage dissent as pageantry. Oaths moved from resonant halls into private rooms where the voice could not reveal tremor. Titles lengthened as terms shortened. The same geometry that once welcomed the sky was repurposed to corral the crowd. Plazas narrowed into funnels, sightlines engineered for spectacle, acoustics shaped to carry one voice and swallow the rest. A city is an instrument. You can tune it for listening or for applause. They chose applause. Frequency tools drifted with the culture that drove them. Chamber proportions that quieted fear were recalculated to soothe it just enough to sell a policy. Bells timed not to the sun but to a schedule nudged bodies through their paces. Crystals, order keepers, were hoarded by offices whose owners had skipped the vow. The gift of resonance became leverage. You felt it in the spine as a gloss of certainty without the work of truth. Economy mirrored the posture. Exchange lost its rhythm of feast and fallow and accelerated into spectacle. Metals were polished for display, not durability. The harbor filled with hulls built to project presence rather than carry grain. The canal that once joined city and sea became a choke point to tax the flow. Debts replaced oaths as the bond between center and periphery. The signal was simple: performance over coherence, extraction over stewardship, reach over repair. Language shifted next. Words that once named shared reality were softened into brands. Service began to mean reputation. Initiation became an entertainment. Sacred stretched to fit whatever needed selling. When a civilization edits its dictionary to protect appetite, correction is already on the calendar. Steel manning the skeptic matters here. The earth moves on cycles. Seas rise and fall. Fault lines store energy that will one day return to motion. A coastline can drown without a single hand raised against the sky. True. And still, cultures meet change differently depending on the shape of their inner law. When the inner architecture frays, response becomes panic. When it holds, change becomes passage. The lesson isn't that morality yanks mountains out of place. It's that misuse invites entropy, and entropy invites collapse when stress arrives. Accounts of the fall preserve both registers, the physical and the moral. You hear of storms that ignored seasons, of fire where water should be, of a sea that came farther than memory allows. You also hear of splendid halls that could no longer host a straight answer, and of leaders whose hands shook when the old oaths were spoken. The text that cuts off as Zeus convenes the gods isn't a cliffhanger, it's a verdict. The field corrects what the will distorts. What do frequency tools look like in the grip of appetite? Persuasion masquerading as ritual. Entrainment used to overrule consent. A drum that once steadied grief becomes the timing device for a triumph. Light that once taught the hours is bent to erase them. The room never darkens, so no one remembers to rest. Even geometry is drafted into service. Corridors that churn rather than calm. Offices designed for surveillance over sight. Put this much signal behind a misaligned intent and you don't get enlightenment. You get manipulation with better acoustics. People felt the difference even if they lacked the words. Crafts strained. Bright students learned to wear masks. The gifted left the precincts quietly to keep their vow intact. A few tried to slow the tide, calling councils back to the old hall. Reopening rites, insisting on the long breath before the vote. Their gains held for a season, then the scoreboard roared back. Momentum is noisy, rhythm is patient. In that contest, appetite won the days that decided the years. The catastrophe, when it came, carried the signature of both hubris and geology. Water rises fastest where wetlands have already been paved. Stone shakes harder where a foundation has been hollowed by shortcuts. Ships meant for parades capsize when the wind insists on physics. You don't need to settle the coordinates to recognize the equation. Concentrated power plus slackened vows plus a planet that will always cash its cycles equals a story whose ending you can already hear if you listen to the breath of the age. This is not Schadenfreude addressed as history. It's a mirror. Whenever a culture confuses volume for voice, spectacle for sanctity, reach for wisdom, the arc bends the same way. First the calendar loses its rest. Then the oath loses its teeth. Then architecture learns to flatter the powerful posture. Then the tools of coherence are assigned to marketing. Then the sea asks its question with wind and weight, and the ledger cannot answer. You live at another hinge. Your age can read the page both ways. The technologies are immense, the vow is thin. The same capacity that could tune cities to sanity can also addict a continent to a feed. The same geometry that could cradle attention can compress it into a slot machine that fits a pocket. The choice is not hypothetical, it's hourly. The fall is a sequence, not a thunderbolt. Every rushed meeting that should have been slowed, every decision made for optics over outcome, every oath shrugged into PR, moves the sequence forward. What came after the waters is the reason we're talking. Not everyone forgot. When numbers went silent and the long breath returned, people gathered what could be carried. Proportion cannons sung as lullabies, color codes stitched into garments, the memory of how to build a room that tells the truth. They moved along rivers and coasts, up valleys and across straits, and rewrote the manual in symbols governments would spare. The next chapter follows them into secrecy, not as romance, but as strategy. When power learns to hide in symbols, memory learns to hide there too. After the waters, memory learned camouflage. People who refused to let the tuning key be lost did the only sensible thing when power mistook spectacle for truth. They hid law inside beauty, not to hoard it, but to help it survive. Ratios were folded into stone, calendars into festivals, breath into prayer, and ethics into rites so ordinary that conquerors stepped over them without noticing. This isn't romance, it's strategy. When a civilization can no longer keep an archive, it becomes one. Forgetting can be manufactured. The mechanisms are boring and effective, standardized so you can tax, flatten so you can march, ridicule so you can rule unchallenged. Rewrite the lexicon and you control memory. Call initiation superstition, rites theatrical, coherent rooms decorative. Centralize the priesthood until the vow thins into costume. Replace oath with ledger. Reward cleverness that serves the center and punish wisdom that serves the whole. You don't need a bonfire every year. Ridicule travels faster than smoke. The response of the remembering ones was simple and cunning. Move the knowledge where ledgers cannot reach. Let masons carry proportion while building walls no censor would suspect. Let navigators keep the sky clock in stories about birds and swells. Let healers teach color and tone as hymns and spells, so a tyrant hears only lullaby while the body hears instruction. Hide the canon of measure in weaving patterns, ground plans, water steps, and pilgrimage routes. Put the lesson where feet and hands will repeat it even when tongues have been policed. Libraries burned, some by flame, many by fashion. Edicts dissolved lineages, scribes were drafted into propaganda, and the gaps were filled with guesses that hardened into doctrine. So memory fled too. Media tyrants cannot index lullabies and proverbs. Harvest feasts and solstice vigils, the way elders touch foreheads when they greet, the way a mother sets a bowl of water in a window at dawn. If you can sing it, you can carry it. If you can dance it, you can cross a border with it. If you can fold it into a recipe, no official will notice you've kept the calendar alive. Mystery schools formed around that insight, not velvet rope clubs for the special, but shelters where law could be kept coherent. Some wore Egyptian clothes, some Greek, some desert, some Himalayan. The costumes changed, the covenant didn't. Vow before access, breath before symbol, service before sight. A student learned to sit through their own weather before they were entrusted with a tone that could move another's. Geometry was not for showing off. It was for building rooms where truth had an advantage. Secrecy wasn't elitism, it was consent engineering. A culture that has tasted misuse cannot hand amplifying tools to anyone who can pronounce the syllables. The veil filters for readiness and protects the keepers from persecution. Power and love with its own reflection is quick to call any other reflection a threat. So the keepers smiled, taught publicly in parables, and saved the specific ratios, breaths, and placements for rooms where appetite had been weighed and found quiet. Amnesia doesn't only swing a hammer, it giggles. Ridicule is the low-cost weapon of any regime that wants to break a lineage without raising martyrs. Brand old crafts as quaint, file a temple's acoustics under accident, turn precise color laws into superstitions of the unlettered, then sell a cheaper copy back to the people you trained to sneer at the original. The trick works because memory is social. Shame edits faster than fire. Because ridicule works, the keepers used another trick, the jester's privilege. Hide sharp truths where censors won't look. A children's rhyme with 12 beats to count the months. A market song whose melody walks the pentatonic scale that calms the limbic system. A pilgrimage that traces a spiral, coaxing the walker into the same breathing ratio a chant would teach. A nave that accidentally lands on a module your body reads as hospitable whether or not your mind knows the maths. Keys in plain sight. Steel manning the skeptic keeps the work clean. Humans are pattern machines. We can draw constellations between any 3 points. Confirmation bias is real and symbols invite projection. Good. Bring that caution with you. Then add a second tool. Repeatable effect. If a proportion, a song, a breath, or a color sequence produces the same clarity every time, you've found signal. If a space makes truth easier to tell, you've found design. If a ritual makes you more honest and more available to service, you've found a keeper. And if it inflates you, numbs you, or recruits you into contempt, leave it on the step. There's another reason the Yalo keys are everywhere. The keepers trusted ordinary people. Wisdom that requires a doctorate to decode dies with the next purge. Wisdom a child can inherit survives. So they taught mothers to hum, carpenters to measure, travelers to watch the sky, merchants to honor the turn of feast and fast. Markets were set on lunar rhythm so rest would still have a place. Ratios were baked into bread and folded into textiles. Your hands remember even when your headlines forget. This is why the map never left. It became custom, craft, accent, preference. You think you like blue because it suits your eyes. Perhaps your lineage coded blue as the calm that lets decisions ripen. You think you prefer round tables because they feel friendly. Perhaps your body remembers councils where status had fewer corners to hide in. You think you light a candle for ambience. Perhaps you're pacing the mind to the oldest metronome we have. Memory hides in the obvious because the obvious is safest. If all this sounds like a story about other centuries, pause. The same forgetting and the same keeping circle your life now. Feeds normalize ridicule. Markets reward spectacle. Buildings compress attention. And yet you still hum in the shower, sit by a window without knowing why, and arrange your desk until your breath finds room. The lineage did not ask your permission to keep you, it keeps you anyway. In the next part, we meet the ones who feel this most acutely, the people who wake into their lives with a sense of being from elsewhere, who touch a stone or a bowl or a coastline and cry without knowing the reason. Not elites, not chosen, simply attuned. If that's you, this isn't a title, it's a task. Custodianship begins where nostalgia ends, in the willingness to serve what you remember without needing applause for remembering. If you've ever stood in an ordinary room and felt a homesickness with no address, you're not broken, you're remembering. The feeling doesn't arrive as a thesis, it arrives like a tuning fork struck somewhere behind your ribs when you see a certain curve of stone, hear a bowl sing, or step into clean morning light. You don't want to collect relics. You want to restore a rhythm. You don't crave status. You crave coherence. And you've spent years trying to explain a pull that can't be plotted on a map. Water makes you sane. Symmetry makes you honest. And busy rooms feel like static in your bones. The marks of this remembrance are subtle and embarrassingly practical. You are the friend who rearranges a table so conversation breathes. You lower your voice and watch a whole cafe soften. You notice how people stand before they know what they think. Your body refuses certain spaces without consulting you first. The ceiling is a fraction too low, the lighting shouts, the ratios rush your breath. You tidy, you tune, you hover at thresholds listening for the note that says enter. As a child, you probably sang to yourself, sorted. Pebbles by feel, not color. Lined pencils into patterns that calmed you, and loved rain because it turned the city back into instrument. You asked strange questions that sounded like philosophy but were really about design. Why does this corner feel sharp? Why is that room kind? No one taught you these questions, your nervous system did. It's the same part of you that still pauses at old wells and carved lintels and cannot say why your eyes sting. There is also the ache. You find ordinary lying difficult. You can perform when you must, but your body pays. You prefer people after ritual, after singing, after silence, after a shared task because something about unstructured bustle unthreads you. You are often misread as aloof or intense, not because you think you're above anyone, but because gossip sounds like static and spectacle feels like a false door. You want to be useful. You flinch at the idea of being special. At your best, you make rooms tell the truth. This remembrance is not a certificate, it's a responsibility. The moment you name yourself Atlantean to stay safe from the work in front of you, the remembering curdles. Pride is the oldest detour. So is fantasy. So is the comforting story that your discomfort proves you're chosen. The antidote is plain and unglamorous: service. If what you remember does not translate into care, better meals, better listening, better thresholds for others to cross, then it is nostalgia in ceremonial clothing. Shadow travels with this role. One is the savior complex, mistaking resonance for permission to fix people who did not ask you to. Another is control masked as holiness, arranging a room until it obeys you rather than until it serves the whole. A third is contempt for the ordinary, scorning a fluorescent office because it's ugly instead of smuggling in a plant, a lamp, a bowl of water, and making coherence anyway. These are all versions of appetite wearing a white robe. There are safeguards. Elders, real ones, are boring in the best way. They don't flatter your gifts. They pace them. They will ask about your calendar, not your visions. They will check whether your agreements are kept, whether you apologize easily, whether you have someone who can say no to you and be heard. Peer mirrors matter too. Friends who love beauty and will still tell you when you're using it to hide. If you don't have elders or peers like this yet, start by becoming one in small ways. Show up on time. Keep your word. Repair quickly and let people's boundaries interrogate your good intentions. Another safeguard is steel-manning your own story. For every moment of déjà vu that lands in your chest, keep a twin file called maybe. Maybe you're projecting. Maybe you're soothing a wound with a romance. Maybe that geometry calms you because any clear order would, not because of a lost archive. And still, if the practice makes you more honest, more available to service, more patient with difference, keep it. Let effect outrun narrative. The field won't mind being right for reasons you can't prove. Your work is not to convince the room you're remembering. It's to make remembering unnecessary because the room now works. Coherence is its own argument. People feel it without language. They speak slower, laugh softer, choose kinder. If a single tea light undercuts a decade of tension at a family table, you've done priestcraft. If moving 3 chairs turns a meeting into a council, you've kept a key. If you place a bowl of water where the eye lands first and find that strangers rest there, you've tuned the day. You'll also need boundaries because resonance attracts hunger. Coherence feels like a warm kitchen to people who have been eating standing up next to the fridge. They will want to stay. Your task is to keep the kitchen a kitchen, not a dormitory. You are not a battery for other people's refusal to rest. The old vow, power with, not power over, includes your own body. With means you do not grind yourself to dust to keep the lamps on. It means you design your life to produce surplus calm you can spend. It means you say not now as an act of stewardship, not stinginess. The work wants to be ordinary, not esoteric, not rarefied, not locked behind velvet ropes. It looks like placing a chair where a window makes sense of the street, like asking a meeting to breathe once before the vote, like humming while you cook because the food tastes of the sound, like taking your shoes off at the door because clay and grit are part of the world and you will meet them consciously, like teaching a child that a candle is not magic, it is tempo, and tempo is how the mind learns to tell the truth. You are allowed to enjoy this. Joy is not a betrayal of seriousness. It is the signature of a tool being used as designed. Relief will likely arrive as soon as you stop proving anything and start arranging what's already here. You already know the practices, even if you don't call them that. Breathing until your shoulders remember down. Tone until your thoughts stop sprinting. Light until an evening gives you back your evening. Geometry until a conversation can land. In the next part, we'll name them precisely and stack them in ways that fit a life with emails and rent and family. You are not building a museum to Atlantis. You are building a life that doesn't wage war on your nervous system. The ache you carry is not a diagnosis, it is a compass. It points towards service, towards small, daring acts of order in a world that is overheated with options and undernourished in rhythm. You are not here to enjoy a secret. You are here to make secrets obsolete because they have been translated into rooms, meals, sentences, and calendars that keep people human. If you do this quietly without a badge, the lineage will recognize you anyway. It always has. It meets itself by the sound of the breath. You don't need a temple on a cliff to begin. You begin with breath, light, tone, and a few inches of clear table. The body as chamber, the room as instrument, the day as score. Think of this not as a spiritual makeover, but as maintenance. You are retuning a system that modern noise keeps pulling off pitch. The measure is practical. If your shoulders drop, if your speech slows without losing clarity, if your choices get kinder while staying firm, the stack is working. If you feel wired or irritable, adjust. Less input, longer exhale, softer light. You are aiming for coherence, not performance. Start with breathing you can live with on busy days. Inhale through the nose and let the belly move. Exhale a little longer than you inhale. Keep the rhythm gentle enough that you could hold a conversation. 4 in, 6 out is a good place to start. 5 and 5 works when you need evenness. Let the jaw unclench and the gaze soften. After 3 minutes, check your posture. It often corrects itself without a lecture. Do this once on waking, once at noon, once before bed, and watch your appetite for drama decline. This isn't a ritual for the perfect morning. It's a reset for the ordinary one. Layer sound onto that breath. A simple hum on one comfortable note will do more for your nervous system than a playlist built to impress. Feel the vibration behind the lips and along the cheeks. Let it tickle the bones around the eyes. Move through the vowels A, E, I, O, U as if polishing the inside of the skull. If you have a singing bowl, strike it once and ride the decay instead of chasing volume. If you don't, your voice is enough. Close with a full minute of ordinary silence so the system can notice the difference. Sound orders mood. Silence lets the order sink in. Treat light as tempo. Morning wants full spectrum. Get your eyes to the sky for a few minutes without staring at the sun. Midday wants filters. Indirect light keeps attention elastic instead of brittle. Evening wants a gentle fall. Kill the overhead glare and let a warm lamp or candle set the pace. A single flame is a metronome your attention can follow without strain. If you work nights or in a windowless box, simulate the cycle. Bright, cool light early in your shift, dimmer and warmer near the end, and a dark hour before sleep. Light trains time inside you. Now geometry. You don't need a treatise, you need one clear module your room can remember. Pick a rectangle that feels honest, say 3 by 5, and lay your desk out in those proportions. Group objects in odd numbers. Leave one clean line of sight to a window or a piece of sky if you can. Sit so your back has a boundary and your face has room. If a corner feels sharp, soften it with a plant or a cloth that curves. Draw the seed of life once slowly and notice your breathing while you draw. That calm is the point, not the drawing. Geometry is mood in disguise. Crystals can help, but not because they are talismans against reality. Quartz is a steady little clock. Rinse a small piece in water, dry it, sit for a moment and assign it a job. Remind me to exhale. Steady my attention. Keep this table sane. Place it where your eyes naturally fall. Between you and the door works for many people, or next to a bowl of water near a window. Clean it when it feels tired. A night under the moon or a rest in plain soil is enough. If crystals aren't your language, use a smooth stone from a river or even a coin. The point is the cue, not the lore. You're building anchors for attention, not altars for ego. Water is both tool and teacher. Keep a clear bowl where the room can see itself. Change it daily. Watch what the surface tells you about drafts you never noticed and voices you never knew were loud. Sip slowly when you sit down to work. If your mind gallops, touch the bowl first and ask one right-sized question. What actually matters in the next hour? Coherence likes specific tasks. So does water. It takes the shape of the honest container it is given. Now stack these into a daily practice you can keep even on ugly days. On waking, open a window if possible. Breathe 4 in and 6 out for 3 minutes. Hum for 1 minute. Look at the sky. Then drink a glass of water. Before your first meeting or task, clear the desk to the 3 by 5. Place your stone or quartz where your gaze will land. Soften the overheads. And set a warm lamp if it's dark. At midday, 2 minutes of breath and 30 seconds of hum are enough to reset. Drop your shoulders, name one useful action, and do that first. In the evening, dim the lights, breathe slow, and let one small gratitude sentence close the day so the nervous system knows to come down. 10 minutes total is enough to move the needle. When you have an hour in a week, make a room into a frequency chamber on purpose. Sweep, open, air. Align one piece of furniture to a line you honor, east for sunrise, or toward the tree that steadies you. Choose one color to lead the eye and keep the rest quiet. If you live with others, make the change by invitation, not decree. Power with, not power over, begins at home. Then invite someone you love to sit for tea without rushing. Notice how the conversation moves in a room that asks nothing of you but presence. If the room succeeds, the volume drops and the truth grows legs. Community multiplies the effect. Gather 3 to 5 people and set a simple frame. 5 breaths together, 1 minute of hum, 10 minutes of quiet, then a round where each person says what became clear. No fixing, no crosstalk, no speeches. Close with gratitude and one small action each will take before you meet again. You have just built a tiny temple with no permit and no budget. The point isn't to be mystical, it is to discover how little equipment is needed for people to tell the truth. Do this weekly and you will feel the field thicken. Keep steel manning as you go. If a practice makes you brittle, drop it. If a tool turns you into a proselytizer, you've lost the vow. If the room looks gorgeous and everyone performs and no one breathes, you built a theater, not a temple. And if something humble, one flame, one bowl, one breath, keeps producing clarity, keep it. The proof here is effect. Better sleep, fewer impulsive words, a calendar that reflects your values without a battle, meetings that land, meals that taste like company instead of performance. Let results, not rhetoric, guide you. None of this is medical advice. It's household craft. Translate it to your body and your constraints. Let repetition do the heavy lifting. The Atlantean mind isn't a club. It's a muscle memory your body is happy to relearn when you stop yelling at it. Practice until these moves are unremarkable, until you forget to call them spiritual because they are simply how a sane day begins. In the next chapter, we scale this from the room to the street, from your desk and breath to the choices a neighborhood, a school, a business can make when enough people choose coherence over spectacle. You've already felt it. The old story of progress without wisdom is tired, and your nervous system knows it. Our tools are astonishing. Our breath is short. The question that undid Atlantis is the question that stands in your doorway each morning now. Will power serve coherence, or will it run on appetite and call the noise success? A new Atlantis is not a continent waiting to be found. It is a way of living that refuses to put technology ahead of truth. It is built when ordinary people make rooms tell the truth, when leaders bind capacity to conscience, when markets remember rhythm, and when schools weld awe to experiment. You won't see it first on a satellite map. You'll feel it in the room you're in, shoulders dropping, voices softening, decisions paced by breath instead of panic. From the outside, that looks quaint. From the inside, it is the only upgrade that lasts. Alignment over spectacle, service over display, rhythm over rush. New Atlantis looks small from far away and enormous from inside. It looks like a home that keeps dawn quiet so the day starts honest. It looks like offices that banish overhead glare and begin with one shared breath, not to be cute, but because meetings made in haste spill harm. It looks like streets that favor shade and feet over billboards and horns, and shop windows that display repairs as proudly as new stock. It looks like a school that times experiments and silence to the same metronome, and a clinic that treats breath as the first medicine, not the last resort. Scale this a little and the effect compounds. The algorithm has less to sell you because you arrive less hungry. The news has less to frighten you because your calendar already carries a place for courage. The night gets darker and sleep returns. Neighbors rediscover names. Children inherit tempo as heritage, not as homework. Start where you stand. Your home, your team, your block. If you run a room, you run a field. Ask the Atlantean questions out loud and let the answers change your design. In this space, what do we serve? What is our tempo? Which tool here multiplies presence and which scatters it? Who is trusted with amplification and how are they bound to the whole? What we celebrate, we multiply. What we time, we teach. If you only reward speed and volume, don't be surprised when nuance stops visiting. If you give shape to rest and descent, honesty learns where to sit. A room that makes truth comfortable saves 1,000 arguments later. This is policy at the scale of furniture, but policy all the same. Commerce can be cleaned without becoming saintly. Price what is real, stop feeding what is hollow. If you sell, offer things that survive fashion and serve the body's need for rhythm. Good lamps, good loaves, good cloth, good work. If you buy, move one subscription's worth of money each month from extraction to stewardship and tell a friend why. The multiplier is not the dollar. It is the story of the dollar. When markets hear a sane story often enough, they change. And when they won't, people leave them. The ledger follows the breath. Education is not a building. It is a pattern. Keep the experiments and the exams, but weld them to awe. Let students measure a room that makes them honest before they graph a data set. Let them build a humble resonant chamber before they memorize equations. Let them cook and sing and fail in public with repair built in. Teach sky clock with maths, breath with biology, ethics with engineering. Teach that a tool magnifies the hand that holds it. Award prestige to students who keep a vow through a hard season, not just to those who test well for an hour. When a school times its courage to the sky and its compassion to the breath, you can feel the city change outside its gates. Leadership in this frame looks unglamorous on camera and medicinal in a room. You know it by the breath it keeps and the rooms it asks for. A leader who knows they are a caretaker asks for halls that slow the pulse, agendas with time for dissent and rights that bind office to service. They measure success by the steadiness of those around them, not the heat of their own spotlight. They demonstrate how to apologize without theater, how to change course without catastrophe, how to design an organization that outlives charisma. Influence decoupled from responsibility is the old story. Influence tethered to repair is the upgrade. Language is an instrument you can tune immediately. Retire the words that flatter appetite. Restore the words that bind you to the field. Say with more than over. Say we serve more than we win. Translate corporate fog into plain speech and watch responsibility come back into the room. Keep jokes, kill ridicule. Keep candor, kill cynicism. Teach children that I don't know yet is not failure, it's an arrival. Teach them a candle is tempo, a bell is focus, a window is a frame for gratitude, a chair is consent made visible. Because the age loves numbers, measure what matters. Count hours slept, breaths taken slowly, meetings shortened by clarity, conflicts repaired, neighbors known by name. Track how often your week honored rhythm, not merely how many items you closed. Publish those counts and you will invent a dashboard that doesn't lie. The scoreboard that undid Atlantis monetized volume. Yours can reward steadiness. Remember, what you plot, you teach. Steel manning the present is part of honoring it. There is no switch to throw. Cities are contradictory organisms. Supply chains can't be sanctified overnight. People bring grief and hunger with them everywhere. Good. Keep the humility. The point isn't to cosplay a golden age, it is to practice choices that add up under pressure. A city that practices breath when it is calm remembers breath when it is shaking. A school that practices repair when the stakes are low can choose repair when the headline comes. A business that practices consent in small decisions can carry it into big ones without needing a hashtag to behave. Sooner or later, you meet the scale question. Is this just self-care with incense, or can it build anything that lasts? The answer is visible wherever a quorum forms. 3 households on a street change the street. 5 managers in a firm change hiring. 10 parents in a school change the timetable. 100 citizens change a bylaw. 1,000 people who refuse ridicule as a sport change a culture's mouth. The field flips long before the map catches up. You didn't need proof to start. You need practice to continue. When practice compounds, the room becomes a city. Don't miss the deeper work we can't publish here. Join our free newsletter at the link in the description and stay connected to teachings that would be throttled on this platform. Add your email now, and for a limited time, you'll also receive a free ebook copy of our book so you don't lose these practices when the feed moves on. If you feel this on a deep level, comment, "I get the code."